The emergency room doors burst open just before midnight. Rain hit the glass outside, and the sound of thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, the bright white lights made everything feel sharper, faster, louder. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms. Shoes squeaked across the floor. A stretcher rushed past the front desk as a paramedic gave a quick report. It was one of those nights. Everyone could feel it. In the middle of all the movement stood the newest nurse on the night shift. She had joined the hospital only 3 weeks earlier. Most people still remembered her as the new one. She didn't talk much during breaks. She didn't laugh loudly like some of the others. She simply listened, nodded, and went back to work. Some of the senior staff had already formed quiet opinions about her. She's too quiet. She looks too calm. I hope she can handle pressure. But she never reacted to the whispers. She focused on her patients, one at a time. That night, a call came in about a serious car accident. A young man was being rushed in with multiple injuries. The paramedics were already performing emergency care in the ambulance. The trauma team gathered quickly. The senior surgeon on duty walked in, tying his mask into place. He had worked in emergency medicine for over 20 years. He was known for being sharp-eyed and strict. He missed nothing. As the stretcher rolled through the doors, the room filled with controlled urgency. Nurses moved into position. A respiratory therapist prepared equipment. Someone called out vital signs. The new nurse stepped forward without being told. She didn't rush. She didn't freeze. She simply moved. She adjusted the four-line with steady fingers. She placed monitoring pads smoothly, as if she had done it 1,000 times. When the surgeon asked for a specific tool, it was already in her hand before he finished the sentence. He paused for a brief second. Most new nurses hesitated during their first trauma case. It was normal. The pressure, the speed, the noise, it could overwhelm anyone. But her hands did not shake. Her breathing stayed even. Her eyes stayed focused. The patient's condition was serious, but stable enough for the team to work. Instructions flew across the room. The surgeon gave orders quickly. The team responded. The new nurse anticipated small things before anyone asked. She adjusted lighting slightly. She repositioned equipment to create more space. She kept her voice low and calm when speaking to the patient, even though he drifted in and out of awareness. "It's okay. You're in the hospital. We're taking care of you," she said softly. The surgeon noticed that too. Not just the skill, the tone. When the patient's blood pressure dipped for a moment, the monitor let out a sharp warning sound. A few staff members stiffened. The room tightened. The new nurse leaned closer, checked a line, adjusted a clamp, and gave a clear update. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. The surgeon watched her hands again. They moved with precision, not speed alone. There was purpose in every motion. No wasted movement. No second-guessing. Under his breath, almost himself, he murmured, "Those hands aren't normal." A nurse beside him glanced over, but said nothing. The patient was eventually moved to surgery. The emergency room slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The tension faded just a little. The new nurse stepped away to wash her hands. Water ran over her fingers as she stared at the sink for a moment longer than usual. No one saw the quiet exhale she released. One of the older nurses approached her. "You handle that well," she said. "First big trauma on night shift isn't easy." The new nurse gave a small smile. "Thank you. That didn't scare you?" She paused. "It matters more that he's okay." That was all she said. Later that night, the emergency room filled again. A child with a high fever. An elderly man with chest pain. A construction worker with a deep cut on his arm. The night kept moving. In each case, she worked the same way. Steady, focused, attentive. She spoke gently to the child, distracting him by asking about his favorite cartoon while preparing medication. She reassured the elderly man while adjusting his oxygen mask. She carefully cleaned and dressed the construction worker's wound while explaining each step so he wouldn't worry. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. Just quiet competence. The senior surgeon observed from a distance more than once. He didn't speak to her directly, but he noticed patterns. She never fumbled with equipment. She never seemed surprised by sudden changes. And most importantly, she never made the situation about herself. Around 2 a.m., a short break came. Staff gathered near the small coffee station. Someone joked about the weather. Someone else complained about the vending machine eating coins again. The new nurse sat at the edge of the table with a cup of water. "Where did you train?" One nurse asked casually. She mentioned a hospital in another state. A simple answer. "That place is known for heavy cases," someone said. "Must have been tough." She nodded once. It was busy. The conversation shifted quickly to something else. She didn't add details. She didn't share stories. But the surgeon, passing by, heard enough to deepen his curiosity. Around 3 a.m., another ambulance siren echoed outside. This time it was a middle-aged woman who had collapsed at home. Her family followed close behind, faces pale with fear. The emergency room energy rose again. As the patient was transferred to the hospital bed, confusion filled the space. Her breathing was uneven. Her pulse was unstable. The surgeon began issuing orders quickly. The new nurse moved to the opposite side of the bed. She placed her fingers lightly on the patient's wrist, feeling the rhythm. Her eyes scanned the monitor. "Pressure is dropping," she said calmly. The surgeon nodded sharply. "Prepare." Before he finished, she had already prepared the necessary equipment. He looked at her again, not with doubt this time, with interest. The situation intensified for several minutes. The room felt heavy with focus. The patient's family waited outside, holding each other tightly. Inside, teamwork carried the moment. The new nurse adjusted her position and leaned closer to the patient's ear. "You're not alone," she whispered. "Stay with us." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but it felt real. Gradually, the patient stabilized. A soft wave of relief moved through the room. The surgeon removed his gloves slowly, eyes still on the new nurse. As the others stepped away to update the family, he approached her. "You've done this before," he said quietly. She looked up at him, not defensive, not proud. "I've worked in busy places," she answered. "That's more than busy," he replied. "You don't hesitate." She didn't respond immediately. For a brief moment, something passed through her eyes, something deeper than the hospital walls. "You learn to focus on what matters," she said. "And what's that?" "The person in front of you." He studied her face. There was no arrogance there. No need to prove anything. Just certainty. Before he could ask more, another call came over the intercom. The moment ended. The night stretched toward early morning. Fatigue began to show on some faces. Shoulders slumped slightly. Coffee cups emptied. But the new nurse remained steady. When a patient's relative grew anxious and raised his voice, she stepped forward gently. "I understand you're worried," she said. "Let me explain what's happening." Her calm tone lowered his anger within seconds. When a young intern struggled to place a line correctly, she quietly guided his hand, without embarrassing him. Small things. But the surgeon noticed. As the sky outside slowly shifted from black to dark blue, the emergency room finally quieted. The worst of the night had passed. Staff prepared for shift change. The new nurse completed her notes carefully, reviewing every detail before signing off. She didn't rush to leave. The surgeon stood near the window, arms folded, watching the sunrise. He had seen hundreds of nurses pass through those halls over the years. Some were talented. Some were average. Some left quickly when the pressure became too much. But something about her was different. Not dramatic. Not flashy. Different. As she walked past him toward the locker room, he spoke without turning around. "You don't look like someone new." She paused. "I am new here," she replied gently. He finally turned to face her. "Yes," he said, "but not new to this." For a second, silence hung between them. She gave a small, polite nod and continued walking. He watched her disappear down the hallway. Again, almost himself, he repeated the words he had whispered earlier. "Those hands aren't normal." Outside, the rain had stopped. A new day began. But inside that hospital, a quiet mystery had just started to unfold. The next night in the emergency room was even busier than the first. The city had been hit by heavy rain all day, and accidents seemed to multiply with every hour. The emergency room smelled of antiseptic, sweat, and the faint scent of rainwater that clung to the clothes of paramedics and patients. Phones rang constantly, monitors beeped, and footsteps echoed off the white tile floors. The new nurse arrived at her station early. She already knew the rhythm of the hospital better than most newcomers. She moved with calm efficiency, checking supplies, adjusting four lines, and making sure everything was ready before the chaos arrived. Her eyes scanned the room like a quiet storm, always observing, always prepared. Soon, the first ambulance of the night arrived. A man in his 40s had been in a motorcycle accident. He had deep cuts on his arm, and his breathing was uneven. Paramedics rushed him in, giving a rapid report as the trauma team gathered. Nurses stepped forward, doctors called out orders, and the room became a controlled frenzy. The new nurse positioned herself immediately. She reached for the equipment the surgeon needed before he even asked. She stabilized the patient's arm, checked vitals, and whispered instructions to the less experienced nurses around her. Her hands moved with calm precision, almost as if they had been trained under fire, rather than just in a hospital. The senior surgeon, standing nearby, couldn't help but stare. He had seen many nurses in his years, but something about her approach was different. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. Every step, every touch, every glance was purposeful. He whispered under his breath again, almost in disbelief, "Those hands aren't normal." The patient stabilized quickly under the team's care. But barely had the room relaxed when another call came over the intercom. A young woman had collapsed in a nearby building during the storm. She was unresponsive, and paramedics were already on their way. The emergency room shifted into overdrive. This time, the pressure was heavier. The ambulance arrived with paramedics shouting details about the patient's condition. She had hit her head, had trouble breathing, and her blood pressure was dangerously low. The surgeon barked orders. Nurses ran in multiple directions. The monitors beeped rapidly, echoing in the tense room. The new nurse moved quickly but without panic. She helped position the patient, checked her airway, and adjusted her oxygen mask. She read the vitals faster than anyone else in the room, recognizing subtle patterns in the numbers that others might have missed. When the surgeon asked for a specific tool, it was already in her hand, ready to be used. Then, suddenly, the patient's pulse began dropping. The monitor let out a harsh, rapid alarm. The room stiffened. A younger nurse hesitated, unsure what to do next. A paramedic's voice rose in stress. The new nurse didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, gently guided the young nurse's hand, and together they adjusted the line that was causing the drop. She spoke softly to the patient while stabilizing her vitals. The surgeon watched, amazed, as she directed the team with quiet authority. "Steady," she said. "Keep monitoring. We're okay." Within moments, the patient's pulse stabilized. Relief moved through the room like a wave, but no one said anything loud. The emergency room continued in its rhythm, but the surgeon couldn't take his eyes off her. She didn't just handle pressure. She controlled it, almost like she could see exactly what would happen next. After the patient was moved to surgery, the surgeon approached her quietly. "You seem familiar with this kind of pressure," he said, trying to sound casual. "I've been in busy places before," she replied softly, avoiding any boast. "Busy?" he repeated. "This is more than busy. You didn't hesitate once, and you guided others calmly. That's not normal for someone new." She gave a small shrug and a polite smile. "I focus on what matters." The surgeon didn't push further. He had a feeling he might never fully know her story. But something inside him knew that this nurse was different from anyone he had worked with before. Hours passed, and the storm outside continued. Ambulances came and went, bringing a variety of cases: broken bones, car accident victims, sudden illnesses. Each time, the new nurse was in the middle of it, steady, calm, precise. She never rushed. She never panicked. She just worked. At one point, a young child was brought in after falling from a small ladder. The child was crying, scared, and holding his arm awkwardly. The parents were panicked, their voices high with fear. The new nurse knelt down beside the child, keeping her face close to his. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now. I'm going to help you and you'll be fine." She kept her tone steady, gentle, and soothing. The child's tears slowed, and his small body relaxed slightly under her careful touch. She explained each step as she cleaned and dressed a wound, making it sound simple and safe. The parents watched in amazement. They whispered to each other about how calm she was, how patient, how reassuring. The surgeon, observing from a distance, noticed again, it wasn't just her hands. It was her presence. It was how she handled people as much as patience. How she made others around her calmer. How she guided the team with quiet confidence. Later, during a rare break, the surgeon found her washing her hands at the sink. The fluorescent lights reflected off the wet tiles, and she seemed lost in thought. He watched silently for a moment before speaking. "You didn't hesitate tonight," he said. She looked up briefly, then back at her hands. "I focus on what needs to be done," she said softly. "That's more than most people can say in a night like this," he replied. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her actions had already said more than words ever could. A few minutes later, another emergency arrived. This time, it was a man trapped under debris after a small building collapsed nearby. His injuries were severe, and the situation was complicated. The trauma team scrambled, preparing equipment, calling for specialized tools. The new nurse didn't hesitate. She moved quickly, placing supplies in order, assisting the team, and making sure nothing slowed down the process. She anticipated the surgeon's needs and guided younger staff when confusion arose. At one point, a piece of equipment malfunctioned. The room froze for a split second. Everyone looked unsure, but she immediately stepped forward, adjusted the machine, and continued working. She didn't complain. She didn't panic. She just solved the problem and kept moving. The surgeon watched her again. He realized something important. Her hands weren't just skilled. They were trained in ways that went beyond a hospital. He had seen skilled nurses before. He had seen confident nurses. But he had never seen someone who moved with quiet authority. Someone whose calm seemed to spread to the whole room. After the patient was stabilized and moved to surgery, the surgeon approached her again. This time, he spoke in a more serious tone. "Tell me the truth," he said. "You've seen more than most nurses your age. Where did you learn to handle this?" She looked at him, her expression calm. "I've worked in difficult places before. High-pressure situations. I learned to focus on what matters." He nodded slowly, sensing that she wasn't going to reveal more. And somehow, he didn't press further. There was a quiet strength in her that didn't need explanation. The rest of the night passed in a blur of calls, patient care, and small emergencies. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Exhaustion was visible on everyone's faces. The team finally prepared for a shift change. The new nurse completed her notes carefully, reviewing every detail before leaving her station. She didn't rush, didn't complain. She just moved with the same calm precision she had shown all night. The surgeon watched her walk down the hallway, thinking about the nights ahead. He had seen many nurses in his career, but he knew one thing clearly now. She was not like the rest. Not because she was new, not because she had skill, but because of how she handled pressure, how she guided others, and how she remained calm when everyone else felt chaos. He whispered quietly again, almost himself, "Those hands aren't normal." The city began to wake outside. Cars splashed through puddles. People rushed to work. But inside the hospital, one quiet nurse had already proven herself in ways words could not describe. And the surgeon knew one thing for certain. He would never forget her hands, her calm, or the way she made everyone around her better. The night had ended. But for her and for everyone who witnessed her work, it was only the beginning of a story that was far from ordinary. The night had been long, and the hospital was finally quiet, but only for a few minutes. Outside, the city still glistened from the earlier rain, and the occasional car passed by, splashing water across the empty streets. Inside the emergency room, lights buzzed softly, machines continued their quiet beeping, and the smell of antiseptic lingered in the air. The new nurse had just finished updating patient charts when a sudden call came over the intercom. Another major accident. This time a multi-car pileup on the highway during the storm. The words hit the room like a shock wave. Multiple victims were being rushed in, some with life-threatening injuries. The trauma team snapped into action immediately. The nurse moved without hesitation. She checked her station, made sure every tool was in order, and positioned herself near the trauma bay. Her movements were precise, deliberate, almost like she had rehearsed them 1,000 times in her mind. She glanced at the monitors, assessed what might be needed first, and started preparing. The first patient arrived, a middle-aged man with a deep head injury. His breathing was shallow, and his vitals were unstable. Paramedics gave a rapid report while the nurse guided a younger colleague, whispering instructions quietly, without panic. She didn't shout, didn't push anyone aside. She simply took control through calm authority. The surgeon watched her from across the room, still amazed at her confidence and precision. "Where did she learn this?" he whispered to himself. "Who trains hands like that?" The man's condition worsened suddenly. His pulse dropped sharply, and the monitors screamed in alarm. Other nurses froze for a moment, unsure what to do. The new nurse leaned in, checked his line, adjusted the oxygen, and called out precise steps. The young nurse beside her followed her lead, impressed and slightly intimidated. The patient's pulse stabilized. Relief spread quietly through the room, but no one celebrated. There was no time. More patients were on the way. The second patient arrived, this one a teenager trapped under the wreckage, conscious but in extreme pain. His parents followed behind, frantic and panicked. The emergency room became a storm of movement. The surgeon barked orders while the nurses and technicians moved quickly. The new nurse approached the boy first, kneeling to his level. She spoke softly, explaining every movement as she worked. "We're going to help you now. You're safe. I'm right here." Her calm voice seemed to reach the boy through the fear. He clenched his hands and shut his eyes, but a small trust began to grow in him. She guided the team as they stabilized him, adjusted lines, and reassured his parents. Her focus never wavered. During a brief lull between patients, the surgeon approached her again. "Tell me the truth," he said, lowering his voice. "You've handled multiple critical cases tonight, as if you've done this 100 times before. You've been somewhere dangerous, haven't you?" She paused, considering her words carefully. She didn't need to lie, but she didn't need to give everything away either. "I've worked in places where emergencies happen constantly. I learned to stay calm, to focus on what matters," she said softly. The surgeon nodded slowly, sensing that she was not going to share more. But something in his mind clicked. He had worked with many people in hospitals, in disaster zones, and he knew that skill like hers didn't come only from training in a classroom. The night grew heavier. Ambulances continued to arrive. One patient had severe burns, another had broken bones, and another was unconscious after a fall. The emergency room felt like a battlefield. Yet, amidst the chaos, the new nurse moved like an anchor. She calmed staff, guided procedures, reassured patients, and never allowed herself to show stress. At one point, a patient heart monitor flatlined. Chaos erupted. The young nurse froze, unsure what to do next. The surgeon barked instructions, and the new nurse stepped in decisively. She performed emergency care smoothly, adjusting the line and guiding compressions while speaking softly to the patient. The monitor beeped steadily again, and the room exhaled as tension lifted. Later, as the emergency team took a short break, the surgeon found a quiet moment to approach her. "I want to know who you are before this hospital sees it. Your hands, you're calm. It's not normal for someone your age." She paused. Her eyes met his. There was honesty there, but also distance. "I've been in situations that most people don't imagine. Emergencies where hesitation can cost lives. That's where I learned." He frowned slightly, trying to picture her in some unknown, dangerous place. He didn't push. He didn't need to. The night was not over, and there were still more emergencies to handle. The next patient arrived, a construction worker pinned under machinery, bleeding heavily from his leg. His co-workers followed, panicked and shouting. The emergency room became a blur of movement again. The nurse assessed the situation quickly. She instructed younger nurses to prepare tools, helped position the patient safely, and guided the team through stabilizing him. When equipment failed momentarily, she didn't hesitate. She adjusted it herself and kept working. Her calm focus spread to the team, and even the anxious co-workers watching from the hallway relaxed slightly. The surgeon observed her again. He realized that skill alone wasn't the extraordinary part. It was how she managed the people around her, the stress, and the unexpected. She didn't just save patients. She saved the room from panic. Later, when the final patient for the night was brought in, it was a young woman who had fallen from a second-story balcony. She was unconscious, and her breathing was shallow. The surgeon called out instructions, but the new nurse anticipated what he would need next. She had gauged the patient's condition before he even spoke. She positioned the equipment, stabilized the airway, and guided the team through emergency procedures. After hours of continuous work, the patient stabilized. The surgeon stepped back, exhausted but impressed. He finally asked her quietly, "How do you remain so calm when everything is falling apart?" She looked at him, her voice soft but firm. "You focus on the person in front of you, not the chaos, not what's coming next, just the person who needs your hands right now." He nodded slowly, understanding something he hadn't before. Her calm was not natural. It was trained, not in a classroom, not in a hospital simulation, but in real situations where lives depended on her actions. He remembered the first night she arrived. He had watched her quietly, whispered to himself, "Those hands aren't normal." Now, after seeing her in multiple high-pressure emergencies, he knew it wasn't just her hands. It was her mind, her focus, her experience, and her heart. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The emergency room quieted for a brief moment. Staff took a deep breath. Coffee cups were refilled. Machines still beeped, but the worst of the night was over. The new nurse finished her notes, carefully checking every detail. She didn't rush. She didn't boast. She simply moved with her steady rhythm. The surgeon watched her as she walked to the locker room. There was something in her presence that left a mark on him. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a person who had been forged in pressure, trained in courage, and tempered by real-life emergencies. As she disappeared down the hallway, he whispered to himself again, "Those hands, they've seen things most of us can't imagine." Outside, the city began to stir with the first light of day. But inside the hospital, a quiet story had been revealed. A nurse who had been underestimated, who had kept calm when others froze, who had saved multiple lives in a single night. Her past remained a mystery, but her actions spoke louder than words. For the surgeon and for everyone who witnessed it, the night had shown something extraordinary. Real skill and courage do not always announce themselves. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, move steadily, and leave an impact that lasts far longer than the chaos ever did. And for the nurse, it was another night doing what she had always done, helping people, staying calm, letting her hands and heart do the work. Her story was no longer invisible. It had begun to shine. The emergency room would continue. Storms would come and go, and lives would continue to need saving. But the surgeon now knew one truth clearly. This nurse's hands, mind, and heart were extraordinary. They were not normal. They were something rare and powerful, built from a past full of real-life challenges. And soon, he would learn more about where she came from, what she had endured, and how those experiences had shaped the hands that now save lives quietly, steadily, and with unmatched skill. The emergency room was quieter than usual that evening. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the city streets slick from rain, glistening under streetlights. Inside the hospital, the faint hum of machines and the soft shuffle of shoes across the floor were the only sounds. Staff had settled into their rhythm, but there was a sense of anticipation, like everyone knew something serious was about to happen. The new nurse had just returned from checking supplies in the trauma bay. Her movements were calm and measured. She was reviewing patient charts when the intercom crackled. An urgent call came in. A young child had been rushed in after a serious accident at a construction site. The child was unconscious, bleeding, and in critical condition. Immediately, the room shifted. Alarms rang, monitors beeped, and staff scrambled to prepare. Nurses positioned themselves, equipment was brought in, and the surgeon stepped forward, giving orders with brisk precision. The new nurse moved without hesitation. She adjusted the child's oxygen mask, checked vital signs, and guided a younger nurse through preparations for emergency procedures. Every movement was confident, calm, and exact. The child's condition worsened suddenly. His heart rate dropped, and the monitors screamed. The surgeon barked instructions, but the child's fragile state required careful precision. Panic began to rise in some of the newer staff. The new nurse took a deep breath. She leaned over the child, her hands steady, guiding the team through what needed to be done. She instructed calmly, placed her hands with careful precision, and reassured the young nurse beside her. "Slow and steady," she said softly. "Focus on each step. We can do this." Her words had a strange effect. The panic in the room faded slightly. The team began moving smoothly again, responding to her guidance. The surgeon watched in quiet amazement. For the first time, he felt confident letting someone else lead part of a high-pressure emergency. Every action she took was precise. She held the child's head still while lines were inserted. She adjusted the ventilator settings without hesitation. She spoke softly to the child, even though he was unconscious, giving instructions and updates to the team simultaneously. The child's pulse stabilized slowly, and immediate danger passed. The relief in the room was almost palpable. Staff exhaled, but no one said a word immediately. Everyone was still focused, still moving, still recovering from the intensity. The surgeon finally stepped forward. "That was incredible," he said quietly, almost himself. Then he turned to her. "You guided everyone through that with calm precision. I didn't even need to intervene. How did you do it?" She met his eyes, her face calm and steady. When someone's life is at stake, you can't panic. You focus on the person in front of you. Nothing else matters in that moment. He nodded, understanding the depth behind her words. He had seen skilled nurses before, but none had commanded the room with such quiet authority. None had moved so seamlessly under pressure, calming everyone around them without raising their voice. Before the surgeon could say more, another emergency arrived. A man trapped under debris after a warehouse accident. He was conscious but severely injured. His co-workers were shouting, panicked, and exhausted. The emergency room once again erupted into chaos. The new nurse stepped forward immediately. She assessed the patient's injuries quickly, guided the team through positioning and stabilization, and began coordinating the response. When equipment failed, she adjusted it without hesitation. When a young nurse froze, unsure of the next step, she gently guided their hands, showing rather than telling. The surgeon noticed something remarkable. Her calm wasn't just training, it was instinct. Her hands moved with purpose. Her mind anticipated the next move before anyone else could react, and her presence seemed to settle the room. Even the panicked co-workers watched in awe, their fear slowly replaced by quiet trust. At one point, a monitor flatlined briefly. A young nurse froze, unsure what to do. The new nurse didn't hesitate. She checked the lines, adjusted the settings, and guided compressions where needed. Within moments, the monitor stabilized. The team exhaled collectively, a quiet wave of relief spreading through the room. After the patient was stabilized and moved to surgery, the surgeon pulled the new nurse aside. "You have experience I've never seen in a nurse before," he said. "Where did you learn to stay this calm under pressure?" She paused, considering her answer. "I've worked in situations where lives depended on every second. I learned to stay focused, to trust my hands, and to trust the people around me." He frowned slightly, curiosity burning in his eyes. "Situations outside of hospitals?" She nodded once. "I've seen emergencies most people never imagine. You learn to rely on focus, not panic. That's what saves lives." He remained quiet, letting her words sink in. There was no pride in her tone, no need for recognition, only truth. The night continued with more emergencies. A child with high fever, a construction worker with deep lacerations, a man with chest pain after collapsing at home. Each time, she moved with the same calm precision. Each time, her presence eased the chaos around her. During a brief lull, the surgeon found her at the sink, washing her hands. Water ran over her fingers, and she stared quietly at the counter, lost in thought. He stood beside her, watching. "You're different from anyone I've ever worked with," he said softly. She looked up briefly. "I just do what needs to be done," she said. "No," he replied gently. "You lead without commanding. You calm without speaking loudly. You save lives in a way that's extraordinary." She smiled faintly. "It's not about being extraordinary. It's about doing what's right for the person in front of you. Her words hung in the air, simple but heavy with meaning. The surgeon realized that her strength wasn't just in her hands or her skill. It was in her heart, her focus, and her quiet determination. The rest of the night passed in a blur. More emergencies arrived, each one demanding precision and calm. She continued to move through the chaos with steady focus, guiding the team, comforting patients, and quietly saving lives. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The city began to wake, but the hospital still hummed with life. Staff prepared for a shift change, tired but accomplished. The new nurse completed her notes carefully, reviewing every detail, making sure nothing was missed. She didn't rush, didn't complain, didn't seek praise. The surgeon watched her walk toward the locker room. He felt a growing respect, not just for her skill, but for the quiet strength she carried. He realized that some people didn't need recognition to be extraordinary. Some people simply moved through life with purpose, letting their actions speak louder than words. He whispered to himself again, almost in awe. Those hands, they've seen more than I can imagine, and they've saved more lives than most of us ever will. Outside, the city was bathed in early sunlight, cars moving through wet streets, people beginning their day. Inside, the emergency room prepared for the next wave of patients. But the story of that night, the calm and the chaos, the quiet skill, the hands that had guided life back on the edge, would remain with the surgeon and the team forever. The nurse's work was never about recognition. It was about people, about lives, about doing what was right when everything else seemed impossible. And in that moment, everyone who had witnessed it knew something true. Real courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it moves quietly, steadily, and saves lives without anyone noticing. The surgeon thought about the first time he had seen her. He remembered the whispered words, the disbelief, the quiet awe. "Those hands aren't normal," he had said. And now, after nights like this, he understood exactly what he had meant. Her hands were trained by experience, guided by focus, and shaped by courage. They led the team through emergencies, calmed chaos, and saved lives. And though the world outside the hospital would continue to move on, the impact of her work would remain quietly powerful in every life she touched. As the sun rose higher, casting light across the wet streets, she finished her shift and walked out of the emergency room. The staff waved, the surgeon nodded, and she offered a faint, polite smile. Her work wasn't over. The city would keep needing her hands, her calm, her skill, and she would continue, quietly extraordinary, moving through life doing what she had always done, saving lives one patient at a time with focus, calm, and heart. The emergency room was quiet as the early morning light filtered through the windows. Outside, the city had begun to wake. Cars moving through wet streets and people heading to work. Inside, the smell of antiseptic lingered and the soft of machines filled the room. Staff were shifting, getting ready for the day ahead, but there was still an energy in the air, a mix of relief, fatigue, and quiet anticipation. The new nurse arrived at her station, already prepared. Her uniform was neat, her hands steady, and her expression calm. She checked equipment, reviewed patient charts, and made sure the team was ready. Even after weeks in the hospital, she still moved with the same precision and focus that had impressed everyone from the start. It wasn't long before an ambulance siren pierced the quiet. A child had been brought in after falling from a balcony. The boy was unconscious, with serious injuries, and the family was panicked, barely able to stand. The room shifted instantly into emergency mode. Nurses and doctors gathered, monitors beeped, and equipment was brought in. The new nurse moved quickly but without panic. She positioned herself near the child, checking vitals and adjusting the oxygen mask. Her hands were steady, her eyes focused, and her voice calm. She guided the younger nurses quietly, giving clear instructions without raising her tone. The child's parents watched in awe as she reassured them while performing life-saving tasks. The surgeon, who had witnessed her skill on many nights, observed again. He had learned to trust her instincts, but there was still a sense of awe at the way she handled every moment. Her calm had a ripple effect, spreading to the team and even to the panicked parents. "Everything is going to be okay," she said softly to the child, her hand resting gently on his small arm. "We're here and we know what to do." The boy's pulse was unstable. His breathing was shallow. The situation demanded careful precision, and every second counted. The new nurse guided the team, anticipating what equipment would be needed, positioning hands, and making small adjustments that stabilize the patient. The surgeon stepped back, letting her lead. It was unusual for him to hand over control so completely, but he trusted her judgment implicitly. He watched as she moved with authority, compassion, and focus. Every motion was deliberate, every instruction clear, every touch precise. Minutes felt like hours, but the team followed her lead perfectly. The boy's pulse began to strengthen, his breathing stabilized, and immediate danger passed. Relief spread quietly through the room, but no one celebrated loudly. The focus remained on the patient, and that was exactly how she wanted it. After the child was safely moved to surgery, the surgeon approached her again. "You handled that better than anyone could have expected," he said, his voice low but filled with respect. "You didn't just save the patient. You guided everyone around you. You gave us confidence when we needed it most." She shook her head slightly, modest and calm. "I just focus on what matters. That's all anyone can do." He smiled faintly, knowing that her humility was as extraordinary as her skill. "No," he said firmly. "It's more than that. You've earned every bit of respect in this room. You've shown us what real courage and skill look like." Her expression didn't change much, but there was a quiet warmth in her eyes. She wasn't looking for praise. She wasn't looking for recognition. She only wanted to do her work, to help those who needed her. The rest of the day continued with its usual pace. Minor emergencies, patient checkups, and routine procedures filled the hours. But something had shifted in the hospital. Staff who had once underestimated her now watched with quiet admiration. They followed her lead, asking questions and learning from her calm, deliberate approach. Even the more senior nurses began to seek her guidance. By late afternoon, the surgeon found a moment to speak with her privately. He wanted to understand more about the person behind the extraordinary skill. "I've seen you handle emergencies that would overwhelm most people," he said. "I need to know, how did you learn to stay so calm, so precise?" She paused, taking a deep breath. "I've been in places where hesitation can cost lives. I've worked in situations where every second matters, where people depend on you completely. You learn to focus on what you can control and let go of what you can't. That's what keeps you steady." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He had witnessed her skill, her calm, and her focus, but hearing her explanation added depth. She had endured experiences most of them could only imagine, and those experiences had shaped the hands, the mind, and the heart that now guided the hospital team. The day moved on, but the impact of her work continued to show. A young nurse approached her, hesitant but eager to learn. "I don't know how you do it," the nurse said quietly. "I get nervous and I freeze. How do you stay so calm?" The new nurse smiled faintly. "You focus on what matters. Take it one step at a time. Help the person in front of you, not the situation as a whole. That's all you can do." The young nurse nodded slowly, already feeling a sense of reassurance. She watched as the new nurse moved back to the station, checking charts and preparing for the next patient. The calm presence seemed to fill the room, reminding everyone that even in chaos, there could be order and focus. By evening, the hospital had returned to a quieter rhythm. Patients were stable, and the staff began preparing for the night shift. The new nurse completed her notes with careful attention, reviewing each detail, making sure nothing was missed. Her dedication to accuracy, combined with her calm demeanor, left a lasting impression on everyone who saw her work. The surgeon walked past her desk, watching her for a moment. He had been part of many emergencies, trained hundreds of nurses, and faced countless crises. But he knew something clear and undeniable. This nurse was extraordinary. Not because she sought recognition, but because she carried skill, courage, and calm in every motion, every decision, every touch. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Those hands, they've done more than I ever imagined, and they've saved more lives than most of us ever will." She looked up briefly, acknowledging him with a faint smile, then returned to her work. There was no pride in her expression, only focus, only purpose. She didn't need anyone to recognize her. Her work spoke for itself. As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow through the windows, The emergency room prepared for the night ahead. New patients would arrive, emergencies would happen, and lives would hang in balance. But the new nurse was ready. Her hands, her mind, and her heart had proven themselves time and again. She was calm, steady, and prepared to face whatever came next. The surgeon thought back to the first night he had seen her. He remembered the whispered words, the quiet awe, the realization that her skill was something beyond normal. And now, after nights of observing her in action, he understood fully. Her hands, shaped by experience, courage, and focus, were extraordinary. By the end of her shift, she walked through the hospital quietly, passing colleagues who now looked at her with respect. She didn't speak much, didn't seek attention, and didn't need to. Her work, her presence, and her calm had left a lasting impression on everyone she had touched. Outside, the city lights reflected on wet streets, and life moved forward. But inside the hospital, one nurse had quietly reshaped the way everyone understood skill, courage, and focus. She had proven that true strength was not about recognition, not about noise or flash. It was about quiet dedication, steady hands, and a heart that cared deeply. The surgeon watched her leave for the day, reflecting on everything he had witnessed. He knew that the story of her hands, her calm, and her skill would stay with him forever. They had saved lives, guided teams, and changed the hospital in ways words could never fully describe. And as the city continued to move outside, the nurse prepared for the next shift, ready to face whatever challenges came, calm, focused, and quietly extraordinary. She was a hero not because she wanted to be, but because she simply did what was needed when it was needed with skill, heart, and courage. In the end, the emergency room had learned a simple but powerful truth. Real heroes don't always wear medals or make noise. Sometimes they move quietly through life, saving people with steady hands, a calm mind, and a heart that never stops caring. And she, with her extraordinary hands, had shown them all exactly what that meant.